You're listening to The RealWealth Show with Kathy Fettke, the real estate investor's resource.
When it comes to real estate investing, there are 5 basic categories: residential, commercial, industrial, land, and special use. You can break those categories down into subcategories. A few of the more common ones are single-family rentals, apartments, retail, and office. But there's many more. I'm Kathy Fettke, and welcome to The RealWealth Show. In this episode, you'll hear from my friend Kevin Bupp, whose focus has been on mobile home parks and parking lots. He has over $250 million in real estate transactions, and his experience includes single-family rentals, apartments, office, self-storage, and build-to-rent now. And he's here with us today on The RealWealth Show to tell us what he's doing in today's changing environment. So, Kevin, welcome back to The RealWealth Show.
Kathy, thanks for having me back. Excited to be here.
Yeah, you just released your new book, and you and Rich have been, kind of side by side on the charts. It's really exciting. How's that going?
No, it's going awesome. It's going awesome. Yeah, it's here. It's finally done. I'm guessing that Rich maybe has done a little quicker than what I did. I always joke with our staff that I started writing this thing like 3 years ago, and as these things sometimes go, life or other, I guess, higher priorities got in the way, and it got about 90% of the way there, and it's got put up on the shelf for literally about a year and a half. And then, kudos to my business partner. He kind of kicked me in the rear about 6 months ago and just said, this is your rock for the next 2 quarters. You get this thing out and you get it completed. And so it's done. It's here. It's out. And I'm really happy that it's finally, made it out to the world. So just super, super exciting times. And I'm excited to read Rich's book as well. I actually ordered a copy, but I don't have a Kindle, and so I'm waiting for the physical version to come to me.
Yeah, he wanted to have it printed. It's called The Wise Investor, for anyone who hasn't heard it yet. He wanted to have it ready, but there was a shortage on paper. His book is with Rich Dad Advisors, and they couldn't get access to paper for 6 months. So yeah, it came out on Kindle, and he did the voice too, and it's a parable. So there's 10 different voices, and many of them female.
Oh,
so it's going to be worth it for people just to get the audiobook, just to hear Rich try to have a female voice.
That's awesome.
I
love
funny.
That. I love it. I'm excited. I've not done the audiobook version yet, although it's in the works. But I'm one of those old school guys. I'm only 43, but I don't have a Kindle. I like the physical. I always get the physical version.
No, I like a real book
the paper
too.
Copy. So
yeah, I agree. Very exciting. And of course, cash flow, that's been your thing. And you've been mainly focused on mobile home parks. Apartments are so hot right now, and they have been. Why do you choose mobile home parks over apartments?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've been in the mobile home park space for a decade now. So it's been quite some time. And I kind of joke, but we kind of started investing in mobile home parks when not many others really even considered it as an asset class. In fact, I had never even considered it as an asset class. But as I was going through the rebuild phase after 2008, had some challenging times for a couple of years, kind of just working through the mess of the Great Recession. I'd owned hundreds of apartment units prior to that, and ultimately I wanted to kind of rebuild things, and I had intended to focus on apartments. Right, I had every intention to just really put all the eggs in that basket from 2010, 11ish, when I was jumping back into to the game and all the way forward. But ultimately, I had a lunch meeting. As some of these things typically go, I had a lunch meeting with a friend of a friend. I'm always looking to expand my network. And gentleman by the name of Randy here locally in the Tampa Bay area. He was a banker for 30 years. And so my buddy was like, hey, go have lunch with Randy. He's a really cool guy. He's a commercial banker. And as you kind of get work your way back in to rebuilding your real estate empire, talk to him. He's got a lot of connections in the local commercial finance space. And so I met with Randy. He had just retired, and he bought 3 mobile home parks shortly after retirement, because he had financed a number of them for clients over the last couple of decades of him being a commercial lender. And in any event, I had a 2-hour lunch with Randy, and Randy, when he found out that I wanted to buy more apartments, he said, have you ever considered mobile home parks? And then he just went on a rant for a good probably hour and a half of that lunchtime about why mobile home parks were superior and in many different ways, right? Like, it was his personal opinion, but ultimately it was intriguing enough to me that I kind of left that lunch meeting and just vowed to buy a mobile home park sometime in the next year. I gave myself a year to figure it out, learn as much as I could, and go buy one and either, prove or disprove, Randy's opinion of the asset class. So anyway, I bought one in 2011, and it went really well. And then ultimately, we've been buying them for the last 10 years. So it's a little bit more challenging today. There's limited supply of that asset class, and there has, over the last 5 years, there's been billions of dollars of institutional capital pouring into this space. And so now there's a massive supply demand imbalance, lots of capital chasing a asset class that ultimately has a diminishing supply, because these parks get redeveloped, they're in the path of progress, there's higher and better uses in some instances, and sometimes the parks just get shut down for whatever reason, right? And so, but there's not enough new supply coming on the market to really feed that demand. And so, I'm not sure that was a direct answer to your question, but ultimately, it's I've always kind of been a contrarian investor, and I always like to go, the opposite direction of the herd. And it seemed like that was a good opportunity to do that back in 2011. And ultimately, again, we bought that first park. It turned out really well. And then we bought a second to see if we could replicate that success, and then a third, a fourth, a fifth. And, anyway, the story goes on. And we own parks today in 13 states and up in the Northeast, Southeast, and some in the Midwest. And it's been a great asset class for us. So it's been a lot of fun.
Isn't it amazing how one conversation can change everything? It's amazing. I know.
I think that's important, to just being open-minded, right? Like always be aware, always just be conscious and be open-minded to new ideas. And again, I think the scare, a lot of folks get scared of thinking in a contrarian manner, or kind of everyone's going this direction. What's over here,
Mm-hmm.
and well, why aren't people over there yet? But just be open-minded that there's other opportunities out there that aren't yet, not necessarily discovered, but they're not in the mainstream media, and there's not big institutional capital chasing yet. In fact, I've got a good buddy of mine that he's been in institutional space for years, and he's like, you try to figure out, just keep your ear to the word in the streets, and you'll get reports from Green Street Advisors, and find out where the institutions are planning to head. Find out where they're tracking to go towards, right? And also try to be a front runner there. Try to be in ahead of them before they ultimately get to that space. And mobile home parks are just that. I mean, I didn't think that back then, but ultimately now I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, we definitely were front runners in that space. And now there's just a ton of capital flowing into the space. Build to rent's kind of one of those markets now, right? There's just billions upon billions of dollars flowing into the build to rent space. Same goes with single family, right? I know that you guys do a lot of single family investments, and 15 years ago that wasn't the case, right? It was a mom and pop business, and now it's very much institutionalized, and there's billions of dollars chasing it. And so,
and back then people always thought, the institutions will never figure out the single family home market because they're, it's all spread out, and how do you manage it all? And Warren Buffett even said, in 2012, I think it was, if I could buy a few 100,000 of them, I would, but how would I manage it? But when he said that, institutions listened and they figured out how to manage it, right?
And that was it. That was the missing piece, right? That was the missing piece. And I believe it was, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was it Progress Residential or whatever the prior variation of that company was. I mean, they're the ones that ultimately, figured out the management, like an efficient management of the single family space when you've got these assets spread amongst, not just a handful of markets, but hundreds of markets across the country. And so they got it. They figured it out. And I think if you throw enough money at anything, you figure it out, right?
They've got the money to throw.
Elon Musk is a perfect example of that, right?
To be Elon. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I got to meet him.
Really?
When I won the top 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs from Goldman Sachs. I got to meet the other 99 entrepreneurs, and he was there, and his story was fascinating, where he put everything on the line and to get SpaceX going, and really thought he was going to go completely broke. Typical entrepreneurial story. And then I think around Christmas, when he's like, well, we're not going to have a very good Christmas, because he put everything on the line. He got a call from the government saying that they would, work with him, and work with him meant lots of money. So it was a fascinating story. But anyway, this is not about Elon. This is about you and you talking about wanting to do something a little different. Certainly Elon does that, trying to dig tunnels in LA. I mean, it's just incredible. Anyway, you have some other alternative investments that you've been doing recently as well, where I don't know if there's a lot of competition. So tell us about that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, so one of the, again, being the contrarian investors that we are, one of the asset classes that we kind of stumbled upon. Again, this is a direct result of a conversation I had. Actually, someone I interviewed on my podcast like 4 years ago, and he was one of a handful. When I say a handful, there truly are less than 5 brokers in the United States that focus on the parking investment niche, so parking lots and parking garages. And so there's one CBRE group out of Texas, and then there's 2 or 3 other little independent brokers. He was one of them, and I interviewed him on the show because I love niche asset classes. And this one, which I didn't understand that business model. I didn't know anything about it before I interviewed him. But ultimately, after our interview, I was intrigued enough to kind of dive a little deeper, and found out there was a lot of similarities in that asset class as there was manufactured housing or mobile home parks. Right, it was a very, very fragmented asset class with 98% of the surface lots and garages in the country owned by what we might consider, may not necessarily just mom and pop, but also just small time investors. They weren't institutional, or they weren't private equity firms that owned it. And so it was a very, very fragmented space, had never been consolidated. And in addition to that, the other attractive nature of that business model was that there are no shortage of professional operators across the country, parking operators across the country. And the unique thing that we found is that amongst all these hundreds of parking operators, some are local, some are regional, some are national, right? So, again, all different sizes. The majority of them don't own the real estate. It's strictly just a management business. And I was flabbergasted by that. I went to a number of conferences, talked to a number of these operators, CEOs of some of these big, management firms, and they just, for whatever reason, they did not have an attraction to owning the physical real estate. They just wanted that cash flowing business. Anyway, so it was that to me, I saw that as an opportunity to try and consolidate a space that, again, was very fragmented, lots of mom and pop ownership. But the other aspect was that a lot of these operators, again, these smaller operators or regional operators, a lot of them hadn't yet adopted the available technology that's out there. For example, we bought a parking lot a couple of years ago, and it still had it's in downtown Wilmington, North Carolina, phenomenal market, historic district. I mean, but they were still collecting payments physically, dollar bills. And so if you didn't have a credit card, you wouldn't park there. And I don't carry cash with me. So I would have had to find another parking spot. I wouldn't be able to park there because they wouldn't have accepted my credit card. And so there's lots of mom and poppy opportunities just like that. And at the end of the day, the big thing that attracted us to this space was that, assuming that it's in a good growing market, either downtown CBD or a high trafficked tourism destination, the current value today as a parking lot, that piece of property will never be less than what it is today, right? It will never be less. It's literally either a piece of asphalt or gravel or whatever it is, but it literally can't go any less than what it currently is at present time. So there's not really any improvements there yet. And so we see it as a good opportunity to have a cash flowing covered land play, one that ultimately has very low maintenance associated with it, and actually very low management responsibilities, because ultimately what we do is we go in to find these underperforming, I guess you could put it, parking lots, and then find the best operator in that respective area, and then sign a triple net lease with them. You'll do a 5 or 10 year triple net lease. And so we're completely hands off, and we let them do their thing. And ultimately, again, there's not much maintenance or upkeep even on their part, because the most you really have to do or fix maybe potholes here or there, signage, striping of the parking spots, what have you. And so again, it's a phenomenal cash flowing covered land play that allows us to not necessarily, we looked at it as we didn't have to expand our infrastructure of our company. We didn't have to hire every parking lot we bought. We didn't have to hire more staff to manage it. And so it was a very easy plug and play investment vehicle to what we were already doing in the manufactured housing space. So, and that's a long-winded answer to your question, but that's one of the exciting things that we've got going today is parking lot investments. And the pandemic kind of kicked that industry's butt a little bit. And so there's some pain there's some pain that's coming out of it, which again, I never wish pain upon anyone, but it was one of the industries, just like hospitality, that
Oh, I see,
saw a lot
pain,
of
which then
challenges.
resulted in opportunity.
That's correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Incredible. Well, we'll see what happens when all the cars are automated and people aren't driving around and
I still need somewhere to go.
They still need a place to park.
Yeah, they still need some place to park. And the interesting thing is, there's a number of major cities, not just a handful, but there's dozens of major cities across the country now that are actually completely eliminating their parking minimums for new developments. And so, a new developer comes in and wants to build a hotel or an apartment building, and prior to that, they had a certain number of parking spaces per square footage, or however they, had the required minimums. Ultimately, there's major cities across the country, and Nashville is just one of the more recent ones, completely eliminating the parking minimum. So developer now has the option: do I add that additional parking space or two that probably wouldn't get used anyway, and I'm just only adding it because the city says I have to, or do I put another, 700 square foot apartment that I'm going to get $4,000 a month for, right? And so that's basically the supply of parking in these downtown CBDs, and same goes with the tourism locations. It's going away very quickly, both with new developments and also as these surface lots gets redeveloped. And so there's a massively shrinking supply, and kind of like mobile home parks, municipalities, they don't love parking, right? It's not sexy, it's not pretty, and so very few new parking lots ever get constructed. And so anyway, it's a very attractive niche, and one that we're incredibly bullish on, and have done quite well just over the last couple of years that we've been buying it. So
congratulations. It's truly amazing how many different ways you can make money in real estate.
That's it. It does. There's no right or wrong.
I met a guy once, he just would buy land because it was a great location to put signs on for the freeway. And apparently that's a huge cash flowing business. If you can,
billboards,
have billboards. Yeah. Have land,
cell phone towers, you got billboards. I mean,
cell phone tower. Yeah. All that. Yeah.
I mean, now, so I've got my brother lives in Pennsylvania, and he owns a millworking company, and they've got I think it's a 60,000 square foot, manufacturing plant building. I mean, it's just a big industrial type building, and they lease out an acre of the rooftop to a cannabis grower. It was space that was not being used, and I don't know what they get as far as income, but it's a hands-off additional revenue stream for them. And so, I mean, there's just opportunities galore. Again, it's all about just keeping your eyes open to the opportunities that are out there, not what the mainstream's looking at, but little niche spaces where one can get in and be in a much less competitive environment, and maybe ultimately make a lot of money before everyone else gets wind of it.
Yeah, another little thing that's popped up that I think is super cool, and I know you and Rich have gone, in the snow. You're a snowboarder and he's a skier. One thing that people hate to do is carry their equipment. So I've been seeing a lot more companies, even if it's a restaurant or a hotel that's really close to the chairlift, and they'll just rent out, space for you to store your equipment, your skis or your board. And I just thought I want to do that in Malibu, be able to have a place where, or at least talk to these people who own oceanfront and like, hey, can we just rent your garage to store our surfboards? That would be an incredible business. There's so much opportunity.
Yeah, there is. I mean, I think there's apps now. I can't think of the name of the one, but there's one where you could rent your garage space at your home if you have an extra garage or parking space that's in front of your house. Probably more keen to urban type environments, but to where you could make use of it, rent it out. If you're not using it or utilizing it, rent it out to someone else that will. And so again, there's just a ton of ways. I know that you're in the short-term rental space as well. I mean, there's just a litany of ways to make money in real estate. And I think that's actually, I mean, that's something important for everyone to understand, and there's so much information out there, with the litany of podcasts that are out there, that didn't exist 20 years ago. There's endless books on the topic, and it can be overwhelming. I mean, there's not just like 5 shiny objects. There's like hundreds of them. And so just kind of picking one of those, like pick a lane and just become the master at it, and try to like block out all the other noise. Cause again, there's no right or wrong. You can make money all these ways that we're talking about. And so just pick one, that you think is best in alignment with you and your personality, and ultimately that you think will help you achieve your goals, and just run at it. And I promise you, if you put enough focus and energy there and you surround yourself with the right people, you'll make money. So
Yeah, no, I so true. And the times I've really made mistakes is when I veered from that.
that's it.
I went to so many real estate investment clubs because I was asked to speak, and I would hear about all the different ways that you could make money in real estate. And for some reason, it still felt like single family homes is my thing. Like, I get it, I understand it. You can kind of expand a little. Instead of just renting it, okay, we'll build these houses, and but it's still in that same niche of single family homes. But it's when I tried the wine village, right?
What is
that was
that?
hard.
A wine village? I'm not familiar with that project. What's that all? I like that. I love wine. So does my wife. And so it sounds very intriguing.
Oh, we have anybody who wants to invest in a wine village in California. It was a way to bring all these really good wineries that are sort of off the beaten track and people don't know about them, and to have this piece of land where they could just drive right off the freeway on the way to Lake Shasta and try different wines from that Northern California area. And that's great for the wineries too. They get the exposure, and we could charge higher rents because they're just having a little tasting room that they'd be renting. But just getting it off the ground has been really hard. So if anybody out there is interested in this and wants to have a wine village, we've got one teed up.
Yeah, no, I love that. We just spent time in Santa Barbara wine country a couple months back, and so I absolutely love wine country in general, no matter where it's at. But Northern California wine country is well, I guess that's technically that's still that's southern. I mean, that's saying Southern California, right? Where you're at.
I'm in Southern, but in Northern California is where Lake Shasta is. And of course, it's just north of Napa. But the problem we ran into was the financing for something different. Mm-hmm. Banks tend to like the thing that they know.
Yep.
So tell me, when you're in these niche markets, how is that with financing? Are you able to get bank financing?
No, it's a really good question. Speaking to mobile home parks 10 years ago, it was incredibly difficult. When I say that, we would bang our heads against the wall, and we would just literally dial for dollars to banks trying to get loans on assets that had good books, good financials, good historic track record of producing cash flow. And the banks they didn't understand it back then. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were in the space, but they were a fraction of what they are today. But they also, back then, they had really stringent parameters of what that park had to be in order to qualify for the loan. So I mean, it basically had to be a 5-star park with concrete curbs and sidewalks, and I mean, just in a primary market. They've loosened up their parameters quite a bit over the last decade, but really, I'd say within the last 5 to 6 years, it's been a night and day difference as far as the number of lenders that understand the space and are comfortable in lending into the space. So again, it was a major challenge, and so there's pros and cons there. So with that being said, I guess one of the benefits of that challenge is that sellers, back when we started buying parks, sellers were aware, or owners of properties that ultimately became sellers, they were aware that financing was hard because they probably went through it themselves when they bought that property. And so it was very understood that owner financing was a viable strategy. Like if they wanted to sell the property for top dollar, that ultimately there's a chance they might have to hold a note on the property. And so, I mean, literally, probably the first 15 mobile home parks we purchased, 12 of those were financed by the seller.
Oh my gosh.
It's completely flip-flop today to the parks that we bought over the last 5 years. Complete flip-flop of the parks that we bought in the last 5 years. I can't remember the last park that we bought that had seller financing. And so anyway, because now there's options. In fact, there's actually probably better options today, better terms than what you might get from a seller. Again, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac are both in this space, and they offer the best, hands down, the best terms if your park qualifies for it. And so we've got many Fannie loans. Again, it's all non-recourse, 30-year amortization, 10-year term, number of years of interest only, and just rates that are below that of what one would get from a bank. And so again, it was hard. It's not as hard today. Parking lots, again, that's it's very niche-y. I wouldn't say there's any lenders out there that specialize in parking lot assets. There are a number of life companies, depending on the size of the asset. We have a garage that we recently purchased in here in Clearwater Beach in our neck of the woods in Tampa Bay area. It's a newer asset. It's in a phenomenal location, irreplaceable location. And so there's a number of life insurance companies that love the parking sector, more specifically garages. And so we've got a number of options there as far as long-term debt's concerned. But when you start looking at small surface lots in downtown areas or even tourism locations, it's more of a local bank. And so long as there's a track record of financials associated with that property and it's a stable property, you're not going to have a challenge. But you're not going to get 75% loan to values. You're probably going to be. They almost look at, even though it's cash flowing, they kind of lump it in the bucket as like land, and so you're somewhere in the 65% range as far as loan to value is considered. And so I'm not sure if that will change. I think it's a very different space. I don't see that space getting consolidated like mobile home parks will, because ultimately, like these surface lots, at some point or time or another, there's going to be a higher and better use. And whenever there's a higher and better use, that property is going to get redeveloped. And so inevitably, as time goes on, we're going to see a shrinkage of available parking in any of the areas that we visit, whether it's a downtown location or again, a tourism location, what have you. And so I don't think that there will be lenders coming into that space. It's just going to be a matter of you're going to bang your head against the wall, find the lenders that are going to be the right fit for that particular property, and keep working it until you find one.
That's really interesting. I would love to hear more about how you structured the seller financing, because I just had somebody reach out to me to fund an RV park. And it may have the same issues that mobile home parks had before, where it's hard to get the financing. But he really crunched the numbers, and it can be very profitable. So that's what I said. Well, go negotiate. If they're having trouble selling, it's because there isn't financing, and they might structure it that way. So that's kind of the exciting thing, like you said, when there's something a little unusual, you might be able to come in and take it over that way. So how did you structure the seller financing?
Yeah, and I don't think it has to be too complicated. First and foremost, we'd always try to align ourselves or our offer of the terms with whatever the seller's needs were. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. In a general sense, one would think that I'm just going to make the offer on seller financing, similar to that of what I might expect to get from a bank. And so if I found a bank to do the deal, I might be expecting they'd give me a 70% loan to value. So I'd 30% down payment. Bank terms are 5%, and normal amortization would be 25 years, maybe even 30 years. And so that's what I'm going to offer the seller. But I think it's more important to find out what the actual needs of the seller are. And what I mean by that is one of the deals that we did, it was I think we paid $1 million for it, rough numbers, and we had originally made our offer, I think 20 or 25% down. I can't recall which one it was. And the seller came back to us and said, guys, I only need about $100,000 to really meet my tax nut that I'm going to have coming my way. And I'd rather just have the cash flow and not take that additional money now and pay the taxes on. So I'd rather just pay it as it comes in. And so basically he lowered the down payment to $100,000 from I think it was $250 that we were going to put down. And so like that was in alignment with his needs. He didn't want to pay additional gains on that, additional $150,000 that we were going to give him as a downstroke. And so he was more focused on the cash flow piece of it. He wanted the reoccurring income. That park had always produced reoccurring income for him, and he didn't want to lose that. It was just now switching. It was switching from the property itself at a property level, providing income to him, to now from a note attached to that property. So, again, I don't think there's not necessarily rocket science as far as like what that structure looked like. Most of our structures always were in alignment to what a bank might offer. Every seller is a little different. Some sellers they want that lump of cash up front. Maybe they're going to go buy something. Maybe they're going to go buy a vacation home, or they want to buy an RV, or they want to go take some, elaborate vacation. So that $100,000 wouldn't have cut it for them. They want more than that down. Maybe they want 25, 30, 35% down. So, but aside from that, we would always just mirror, typical terms that might be available, from a bank. And, you want it to be a win-win scenario. I do hear some people, bragging about it, it was zero down, or I got them to sign on a 3% rate, or got the whole thing to be interest only throughout the entirety of the term, or I got them to give me a 35-year amortization or what have you. And, you can always ask for those things, and ultimately it would be to your benefit if you can get terms that are much better than that of what a traditional bank might offer. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's got to be a win-win for both parties. So I think just having that conversation, really figuring out what's in the best interest of the seller and also the buyer, so that ultimately you can come together and make a fair deal happen. Everyone walks away happy and satisfied and feels like they were successful in their negotiations.
I love that. Awesome. Okay. Well, any last tips for our audience on what, opportunities or lessons learned?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think just, I think we hit on a little bit about just, a lot of, there's a lot of noise out there, lots of opportunities, especially now with social media. You go on your feed, and again, if you're like you, Kathy, like me, and like a lot of people that are probably listening, they probably have at least a few hundred other people on their social media feed that are also real estate investors, and people are making posts about, they're making, whatever acquisition fees or wholesaling fees or whatever it might be. They're making money in, many different ways in real estate. And I think just, staying the focus, staying in your lane, picking your lane and staying in it, and just becoming the expert at it. You'd mentioned, single family, like you get it, you understand it. You've been doing it for decades now. And there's plenty of, that is your space. I mean, you guys have mastered that space, but it's taking you time to do that. You would not have been able to master that space if you were doing 10 other things that simultaneously, right? And
Right.
so pick that lane, stay in it, and become the expert at it. And ultimately, you'll find success. Again, there's a million and one different ways to make money in real estate. Just pick one that best aligns with you and your personality and your ultimate goals, and I think you'll do great.
Awesome. All right, Kevin, great to have you here. Thank you so much.
Kathy, thanks for having me. Take care.
And thank you for joining me here on The Real Wealth Show. I want to let you know that my hubby, Rich Fetke, just published a book that you might want to check out. It's called The Wise Investor, a modern parable about creating financial freedom and living your best life. It's a very easy to read story about a family man who's tired of living paycheck to paycheck, and he decides to learn more about real estate, so he gets a mentor and eventually becomes wealthy in more ways than one. The Kindle book is for sale now on Amazon, and the hardcover and audio versions can be pre-ordered. Again, the book is called The Wise Investor, and you can also read more about it at realwealth.com/grow. Thanks again for joining me here on The Real Wealth Show, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are provided for informational purposes only and should not be construed as an offer to buy or sell any securities or to make or consider any investment or course of action. For more information, go to realwealthshow.com.